Right, so as we normally do, we'll start with our creed. And it's an amazing thing to have something to remind us of what we're here for and what we're to do and how we're to be. And our creed is the Shema, but it's the Shema as Yeshua told it, where he combined what was written in the Torah as the Shema with another Torah commandments. And it turns out like this: Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord our God is one. And we must love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our strength. And the bit that Yeshua added, that shows the true heart of the Torah, is that we must love our neighbours as we love ourselves. Something I like to remind and add at the end of that, though, is that sometimes we may find it hard to love ourselves. You know, certainly myself, a number of years ago, whenever I heard love our neighbours as I love ourselves, I said that's a bad idea, because I don't have much love for myself these days. But when I remembered that God loves me, that God loves every single one of you, we can simply add to that we love ourselves as God loves us, as Yeshua loved us. When we're in those pits of despair and darkness and stuff, there is one who we can call upon to bring us out of it. So I always just like to affirm that, because it's something that's often forgotten. It's you know, that we also do need to have a degree of love. I'm not talking about narcissism, I'm not talking about self-obsession. I'm talking about self-respect. I'm talking about respect for the person that God made you. God made you who you are. All of your flaws, all of your positives. You know, he made all of them for his will and his purpose. And who we are can be that. So if we're ever feeling like we're lacking a bit of self-confidence or self-esteem, remember, we are who God made us. And that's a beautiful thing. We can bring his light to the world through that. So remember that God loves us. And that love, the way to show to God, and the way to show to our neighbours, and way to have for ourselves as well, is detailed by Paul in 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak with the tongues of men and of messengers, but do not have love, I have become as a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophecy and know all secrets and all knowledge, and if I have all belief so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am none at all. And if I give out all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I give my body to be burned, but do not have love, I am not profited at all. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not boast. It is not puffed up. Love does not behave indecently, does not seek its own, is not provoked, reckons not to do evil, does not rejoice over unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It covers all, believes all, expects all, endures all. Love never fails.
Hallelujah.
Amen. Amen. So, without further ado, this parsha is called Tetze. And if you'd like to elucidate on what that means for us, brother?
Thanks, bro. Tetze. It's as always, the Torah portion is titled after one of the first words in the parsha, and these are the first two words in the parsha. It's made up of two words, ki and tetze. Ki is a conjunction which can mean in different, depending on the context it's in, it can mean if, when, so, for, that, because. In this context it means when. And the second word, tetze, is taken from the root verb, yatsa, which can mean different things like to go out, to come in, to bring, to depart, to proceed. But as always, in context, which we must read the text in context, in this parsha it means to go forth or to go out. So this Torah portion, Tetze, means when you go out or when thou goest forth. It's from the verb yatsa and it's in the second person plural, Tetze.
Thank you very much. Right, well, I'm not going to do a summary of the parsha because it's a very difficult one to summarise without actually just going into all of the points. So what we'll do is we'll just get straight into the text. We'll read chapter 21, then we'll break it down, we'll see how we're going, and we'll take things from there. So, would you like to read first, brother? And it's chapter 21 and verse 10 to 23.
When you go out to war against your enemies, and Yahovah your God hands them over to you, and you take them captive, suppose you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her and would take her as a wife for yourself. Then you are to bring her into your house, and she must shave her head, trim her nails, and remove her captive's clothing. Then sit in your house and weep for her father and mother a full month. After that, you may go to her and become her husband, and she will be your wife. Now if you are not pleased with her, then you may send her off wherever she wishes. But you must certainly not sell her for silver. You may not treat her as merchandise, since you have humiliated her. Suppose a man has two wives, the one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved bear him sons. But it happens that the firstborn son belongs to the unloved wife. Now on the day he lets his sons inherit what he has, he must not treat the loved one's son as firstborn, in place of the unloved one's son, who is the firstborn. Rather, he must acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the hated one, by giving him a double portion of all that he has. For he is the first of his vigour, the right of the firstborn is his. Suppose a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not listen to the voice of his father or mother. They discipline him, but he does not listen to them. Then his father and mother are to grab hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city, to the gate of his place. They will say to the elders of his city, "This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He does not listen to our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Then all the men of his city are to stone him with stones to death. So you will purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear and be afraid. Suppose a man is guilty of a sin with a death sentence, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree. His body is not to remain all night on the tree. Instead, you must certainly bury him the same day, for anyone hanged is a curse of God. You must not defile your land that Yahovah your God is giving you as an inheritance.
Sila, thank you. So, this is a very, very dense parsha. It's not one of the longest in terms of the chapters, but it's jam-packed with stuff. It's incredible, like how condensed the message is of this one. So what I'm going to do is we're going to break it down little section by section. So I've got a few notes here to follow. Right, okay, so the first one that I've got, 10 to 14, where it talks about taking a woman that was taken captive after war. Now this is actually, funny enough, this is actually something that was covered the very last time I was sat here. And it was, I just want to make a quick reminder of what it means, is that the people captured in war were still supposed to be treated as dignity. Still supposed to be treated with dignity. They weren't supposed to be treated as just spoils of war, playthings. there was a mandate here in Torah that they had to treat those women with respect. And if they weren't going to marry them, then they had to allow them to go free to wherever they wanted.
Only after they made sex to them.
No, absolutely not. No, because don't forget, that counts as fornication. Sex before marriage counts as fornication. So, in fact, this is actually something that's covered in a chapter later on. But if they wanted to take that woman as their wife, they had to go through all the proper rituals. In fact, if you read this here, it shows that they had to be given time to mourn. They just lost their families. So they were supposed to be treated with the respect and dignity that is due to someone who has just lost family. Before then they could be taken as a wife, and even then it had to be they had to be grafted in. So it was a lot more compassionate than certainly the barbaric nations that were surrounding them who would take advantage of those who had been displaced by war. So I just wanted to go over that one quickly. Now the next part where it talks about when a man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved. This is verse 15 to 17. This is an interesting one because in Genesis we have a couple of stories that talk about this very thing as being part of the foundation of Israel. And we have Abraham with Sarah and Hagar, and then later on in the actual foundation of Israel as a nation, as descendants of Jacob, the issues with Rachel and Leah. Now this law, what this suggests, this law being in place, is that like polygamy, it's not something that God approves of. The idea of taking away the blessings of the firstborn and giving it to the favoured son. It was used by God for the development of his nation, but it wasn't necessarily something he approved of. Again, as we talk about the idea of polygamy, you look at Yeshua, even Paul talks about the idea of being just married to one woman, because this idea of the echad being, it was used as the foundation of the nation in Genesis. But at this point forward, that was it. You follow this code. That was different. They were the patriarchs' families. They needed to follow God's will in that way. But from this, Israel had to treat their wives with respect. This is why it's also an idea that Paul really highlights, that you are supposed to have one wife. It means that there's no loss of love, there's no favoritism within a marriage, and that's it's a really important thing. And throughout this parsha, we'll keep on coming back to this idea of respect, but we'll move forward because there's a lot of these examples to cover. So 18 to 21, when a man has a wayward and rebellious son who is not listening to the voice of his mother or father. Wow, this one's an intense one and is often interpreted to people as meaning they would stone a child to death. Absolutely not. Look at the language of the verses. When a man has a wayward and rebellious son who is not listening to the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have disciplined him, does not listen to them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him, bring him out to the elders of the city, to the gate of his city, and shall say to the elders of this city, this son of ours is wayward and rebellious. He is not listening to our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. How many children are drunkards? You know what I mean? It's this idea that it's written here, that is specifically given to show that this is a child, a son, who is beyond the age of accountability. They are thus an adult at this point. They are accountable for their own actions and thus must be disciplined as such. But of course, parents are going to pay attention to the health and the well-being of their children, even when they're beyond the age of accountability, aren't they? Yeah. And that's where the confusion comes in, because what this is highlighting is the concern of the parents for their adult child. But a lot of people will read into this as being, oh, you're just going to stone a child because they're not doing what the parent says. It's not a case of that. This is showing the concern of a parent who is who's worried for the safety and the sake of the health and the spiritual health of their child, because they're making the wrong choices. But this is where this starts to come into, is where talks about the idea of personal responsibility. Go on,
Well,
brother.
there's an age of accountability, isn't there? So obviously, it's age 20. So after that, so almost, well, before that, it's on the parent's head, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
To look after this child. So, but even so, after that, so it's speaking of a man here, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Who's, going about, and what I noticed as well is rebellious as well. You know, a rebellious child, and we know how serious, you know, what God's view on rebellion is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially, you know, that was the first sin, wasn't it? Really, when Satan rebelled against God. So we don't really know the level of this, and I guess that's why there was certain people who would make these decisions. You know,
Yeah.
certain judges or leaders who would make these decisions.
Well,
before-
absolutely. Look at what we looked at last week.
Yeah.
It had to be with 2 or more witnesses, and it had to be before the people who made the right rulings, the judges. Go on, brother.
I think it's also worth making note that there's no record of this ever being carried out.
Yeah,
That's good.
There's things written in scriptures that are there mean as a deterrent,
yeah.
a severe deterrent.
We can't assume that they didn't, but we can't assume that they
that
did
it
it at the same
Exactly.
respect because it's not written down here.
How many of us, when we were younger, me included, have done something? I remember doing. I won't go into detail, but as a teenager, I did something, and my dad turned around to me and said, "If I catch you doing that again, I'll give you the belt. I will belt you." I never did it again.
Yeah.
But looking back, he had no intention whatsoever to give me the belt. He loved me
Yeah.
as his child, his eldest son, and it was his way of giving me a deterrent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, he had no desire whatsoever to lay his hand on me or to punish me in that way, but it worked.
yeah.
As a deterrent, it worked, and I never did it again.
You look at that moment in the Gospels where Yeshua stops the men from stoning the adulterous woman because they haven't got witnesses, and he just says, "Well, look, any one of you has no sin, then you can throw the stone, but if not, walk off." And that's an important thing to notice, and that's possibly another thing that Yeshua was talking about, is maybe they were too willing to jump to these things. You know, if those people were willing to stone that woman without the correct procedures going ahead, then maybe there was that case of the nation starting to use these things in a wrongful way. Yes, this was written as a deterrent. The idea of having the laws in place and the disciplines of law in place is so that you know what's going to happen if you do wrong. So don't do wrong.
By Torah's own law, we as the bride should have been stoned.
Yeah, exactly.
But we've been forgiven.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what Yeshua showed us, and that's a beautiful thing because it's a case of, well, we read these Torah laws now, but we know that Yeshua says that no one person has the right to do this if they still have sin in their lives, and every person has sin in their lives. Only when we're raised incorruptible will we be free from the corruption of sin, flesh, and death. So I just wanted to put that apologetic there. But there's another interesting point with this one, and I'd like you to skip to Matthew 19, and it's verse 29, to have a look at another implication of this particular Torah law.
And everyone who has left houses, or brothers, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. But many who are first shall be last, and the last first.
Thank you. And then there's something else that we can use to draw this together, and that's Mark 9, and it's verse 43. I'll just read this one. It says, "If your hand makes you stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter into life crippled than having 2 hands to go to Gehenna, into the unquenchable fire." So what we can see with this is this idea of taking responsibility, not being at risk of sinning on account of someone that you know, no matter what your connection to them. If they're beyond the age of accountability, they are responsible for their own sins. don't be dragged down with them. You know, that's why I brought these two verses together, because they say, blessed is he who leaves this house for Yeshua's name's sake. We mustn't be dragged down into sin by someone we know, regardless of our connection to them. If they are beyond the age of accountability, it is no longer our responsibility to make sure that they don't sin. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't be compassionate and work towards trying to encourage them to be to improve themselves, to actually start working towards repenting, getting rid of their sin. But we should be wary of not being pulled into sin ourselves. So it's all about ridding the source of sin and sin itself from our lives, regardless of our connection to that source. So, and the last one in this chapter is that last section where it says, a man who is committed a sin worthy of death shall be put to death and hung on a tree. And then anyone that will remove his body from the tree, because if it hangs overnight, it's cursed. Now, immediately we may think of Judas hanging on the tree. He was a cursed man because of the sin he committed of giving up Yeshua. But there's another angle to look at this. That's something that we may immediately link. But let's have a look at Galatians 3 and it's verse 13. Messiah redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs upon a tree. This law, this mitzvot, is directly referring to what Yeshua would be. He became cursed so that we wouldn't. That law, in fact, there's a number of laws in place here that really point towards the crucifixion. Of all of the things that we've seen in Torah that relate to Yeshua, there's a number in this particular parsha that relate directly to the crucifixion. And it's intense stuff, it really is. But because we've got so much to cover, we'll move on to the next chapter now. And after we've read chapter 22, we'll break down a few points and then we'll have a break, because otherwise it's going to be a tough one. So we're going to read chapter 22.
When you see your brother's ox or a sheep straying away, you shall not hide yourself from them. Return them to your brother without fail. And if your brother is not near you, or if you do not know him, then you shall bring it to your own house, and it shall be with you until your brother seeks it. Then you shall return it to him. And so you do with his donkey, and so you do with his garment, and so you do with whatever your brother loses, which he has lost and you have found. You are not so allowed to hide yourself. When you see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down on the way, you shall not hide yourself from them. Help him raise them without fail. A woman does not wear that which pertains to a man, nor does a man put on a woman's garment. For whoever does this is an abomination to Yahweh your Elohim. When you come upon a bird's nest along the way, in any tree or on the ground, with young ones or eggs, with the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, do not take the mother with the young. Let the mother go without fail, and take the young for yourself, so that it might be well with you, and that you shall prolong your days. When you build a new house, then you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you do not bring blood guilt on your house when one falls from it. Do not sow your vineyard with different kinds of seed, lest the yield of the seed which you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. Do not plough with an ox and a donkey together. Do not put on a garment of different kinds of wool and linen together. Make tassels on the four corners of the garments with which you cover yourself. When any man takes a wife and shall go into her, he shall hate her, and shall make abusive charges against her, and bring an evil name on her, and say, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I did not find her a maiden. Then the father and mother of the young woman shall take and bring out the proof of the girl's maidenhood to the elders of the city at the gate. And the girl's father shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man as wife, and he hates her. And see, he has made abusive charges against her, saying, I didn't find your daughter a maiden. And yet these are the proofs of my daughter's maidenhood. And they shall spread the garment before the elders of the city. And the elders of that city shall take that man and punish him, and fine him 100 pieces of silver, and give them to the father of the young woman, because he has brought an evil name on a maiden of Israel. And she is to be his wife. He is not allowed to put her away all his days. But if the matter is true, that the girl was found not a maiden, was not found a maiden, then they shall bring out the girl to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death with stones, because she has done wickedness in Israel, to whore in her father's house. Thus you shall purge the evil from your midst. When a man is found lying with a woman married to a husband, then both of them shall die, both the man that lay with the woman and the woman. Thus you shall purge the evil from Israel. When a girl who is a maiden is engaged to a husband, and a man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gates of that city, and shall stone them to death with stones. The girl because she did not cry out in the city, and the man because he has humbled his neighbour's wife. Thus you shall purge the evil from your midst. But if a man finds the girl who is engaged in the field, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. But you shall do no matter to the girl. The girl has no sin worthy of death, for the matter is like a man who rises against his neighbour and kills him. For he found her in the field, and she cried out, the engaged girl, but without anyone to save her. When a man finds a girl who is a maiden who is not engaged, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, then the man who lay with her shall give to the girl's father 50 pieces of silver, and she is to be his wife because he has humbled her. He is not allowed to put her away all his days. A man does not take his father's wife, nor uncover his father's skirt.
So, right, so this is going to be quite similar to the last chapter, where it's little bite-sized chunks of scripture that we're going to go through, because like I said, there's so much in this one. But first things first, verses 1 to 4, when you see your brother's ox or his sheep straying away, you shall not hide yourself from them, return to your brother without fail. This one is quite an ancient edict. This idea of helping someone with the animal's burden or things like that's actually quite an ancient law, but this time round it's infused with a sense of brotherly love. Whereas previously it was just a case of help people out, now it's a case of help people out in love. This is where we start to see really the true heart of what Elohim wants. These are not just simply commandments to be useful. These are commandments to make us, allow us to see the value in others, and to express that by showing them love. Now I want a bit of audience participation here. I've got a number of scriptures that I want read, but I'd like a different person to read each of them. So is there anybody that's willing to do that?
Sure.
Go on. Okay, so could you take Philippians 2:4 for me, brother? Someone else?
No.
Okay, could you take Galatians 6 and it's verses 2 and 10? Not 2 to 10,
Okay.
2 and 10. Brother?
I'll take one.
Romans 12:10. And then bro, could you read John 13:34 to 35?
2:4.
That's right.
Each one should look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others.
Fantastic. Next one, please.
Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Messiah. So then, as we have opportunity, let's do what is good toward all men, and especially toward those who are of the household of the faith.
Fantastic. Next one, please.
Be tenderly devoted to one another in brotherly love. Outdo one another in giving honour.
And finally,
A renewed command I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this shall all know that you are my taught ones, if you have love for one another.
Amen.
this brings us right back to 1 Corinthians 13 and the creed that we say in the Shema. It's all about doing things through love. Not just because we have to, but because we want to help others through love. This is the best way we're going to be ambassadors for Yeshua. If we show that brotherly love to everyone we encounter, if someone doesn't like that, that's on them. But it's not on us. We are just showing them the love that God has given to us. God gave us love. God showed us love. He gave us grace. It's our duty to give that to others.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that's, if there was any doubt that that was the heart of the Torah, right there, those scriptures that we just read should show that that was what Yeshua showed us in the Torah. You know, so I think that's a really, really beautiful thing to start out with. The rest of the chapter is pretty intense because it starts going on to what are covered under adultery laws. First, verse 5, where it talks about not a man not wearing a woman's garments and a woman not wearing a man's garments. Now this, I just want to give a brief apologetic for this one. This is not referring to women wearing jeans. And this is not referring to kilts. What this is actually specifically referring to in this mitzvot is there were Canaanite rituals, pagan rituals, in which there would be a gender reversal as part of that sordid ritual. Now, I'm pretty sure that without saying much more, that you can start making links with the way in which this world is descending into satanic practices just as standard. They may not be treated as rituals these days, but they still have the same power, they still have the same effect.
Same spreader.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm pretty sure cross-dressing isn't exactly something that God approves of anyway. So, on multiple levels, we're supposed to be what God made us. God made me a man, therefore be a man. God made you a woman, therefore be a woman. We are to be what God made us, not what we want ourselves to be, because what we want ourselves to be, it's like that ludicrous modern trope of follow your heart, listen to your heart. In Jeremiah it says the heart is deceitful above all things. What our heart desires is not what necessarily is right for us. We've got to go according to God's will, not our own. Our will is directed from a perspective that, how many people are on the planet these days? What was it, 7.4 billion or something like that? So if we just think of it in those terms, our perspective is 1 over 7.4 billion. That's a pretty limited perspective. So to consider that very minute perspective is to be so right that you can base an entire attitude of truth from that, I think that's pretty short-sighted. Trust in God's will. He made all things what they are because he knows best. He can see the future because he exists outside of time. He knows what is to be. He knows what has been and he knows what is. So trust him. He knows what's best. This one, if you find a nest. This one might seem a little bit strange to include. When you come upon a bird's nest along the way in any tree or on the ground with young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting on the young or the eggs, do not take the mother with the young. So, why is that in there? Well, again, this is about respecting the sanctity of life. In fact, there's actually a code of conduct in hunting, in game hunting, whereby you mustn't shoot a doe and her fawn together. It's actually less frowned upon to kill the fawn than it is to kill the doe. Now, and understand, obviously, if people are sort of against hunting and whatnot, fair enough. But I just wanted to use that as an example that this is still something that's considered in modern codes of practice. If you take the mother, that family, if you like, has been completely wiped off the face of the planet. No longer can young be brought forward. Now, yes, it might, it might seem like a tough thing. Oh yeah, but you're killing the chicks and stuff. And yes, fair enough. I mean, there's a lot of people that have vegetarian diets on account of the respect for the sanctity of life, and I respect that. But this is referring to those who would see, okay, I can get some produce from this, fantastic, and just be unscrupulous and take the mother as well. No, you take that mother, there is no more life that can come from that family. And that, again, it's about respecting of the sanctity of life. You remove that entire nest with the mother, there is going to be no more young. Fair enough, you've had a meal there, but no more. It's not sustainable. So again, respecting the sanctity of life. And one of the things I love about this chapter, in fact, there's a couple of moments in this parsha again that cover this, but this chapter has a couple of moments where it really highlights that we're supposed to respect animals as well as people. I mean, a lot of people miss this from the Torah. It's like, oh, it's all about respecting man, not respecting animals. No. The respect for the sanctity of life covers animals and people. And two of these mitzvot actually show this. It talks about helping your brother with their animals and stuff. It's about helping the animals much as it is about helping your brother. Yeah. And here we're supposed to respect the sanctity of life, that we preserve that means of more life coming forwards. It shows right the way through Scripture that animals are respected as well. I mean, if people start then becoming confused, why are all the sacrifices? Why were the sacrifices in place then if we're supposed to respect animals? Yeah. Well, right the way through Scriptures, again in the Psalms it comes up a couple of times, in Isaiah it comes up, it says, I did not delight in your sacrifice, I do not delight in your sacrifices, I don't want sacrifices, I want your obedience. The Father would sooner have you being obedient so that those sacrifices weren't needed than for those sacrifices to be used as an excuse to keep on sinning. The problem is people became complacent with the sacrifices. It just became another thing they had to do. They were supposed to be horrified by that animal losing their life. That animal had to die in the sacrifice because it was blameless, because it did not know how to sin, therefore it did not have the defilement of death and sin in its life. That was the only reason why it had to die, because no person before Yeshua was blameless. Therefore no person could offer themselves up to be an atonement for sin. Moses tried and he was turned down. The animals had to be sacrificed because they were the only things that could take the sin, because they weren't defiled by that. That doesn't mean to say we were supposed to all of a sudden start presuming upon their deaths. Thank God for Yeshua. That no more innocent life has to be offered up to the Father on account of our wickedness. They were supposed to be heartbroken by those animals taking their sin. So I think that's an important thing to remember, that the Torah does cover the sanctity of life for animals as well as people. A lot of that can often be ignored. Do not sow your vineyard with different kinds of seeds, lest the yield of the seed which you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. Do not plough with an ox and a donkey together. Do not put a garment of different kinds of wool and linen together. Now, immediately, this may be confusing to people. It's like, oh, why are we not combining? Now, there is actually some scientific basis to this, but we will never know the full extent of this until we can ask the Father himself. Now, one of the things about the wool and the linen that I've heard, and again, I've heard this, that you could have to go and do research yourself. I'm not saying it's 100% correct, but it's worth having a look into. But again, it's something that we'll never know the fullness of until we can actually be with the Father's presence. But someone told me that there's like everything vibrates. Everything is vibrating at a particular frequency. And the vibrational frequencies of linen and wool have properties that are actually beneficial to us.
Healing.
There you go. So apparently the vibrational frequencies of linen and wool combined together they cancel each other out. So you don't get that effect. Now, the thing is, I have no way of proving the science of this. So I'm not going to say put too much stock in that. We can look into it. But I think more importantly, what these things are talking about is mixing doctrines. Now, very interestingly, it starts with the idea of don't sow your vineyard with different seeds. We can't mix two doctrines together and still expect it to come out with the right idea. The term that's used is syncretism. We can't pick and choose what elements of doctrines we like.
Yeah.
We follow the doctrine of the Torah, and that's it. This is explained to us. If we don't quite understand what it's saying in the actual Torah itself, that's why we have Yeshua. That's why we have the Gospels. That's why we have the epistles, to show us what that truly represents. But that is our doctrine. We can't start picking and choosing from other denominational faiths to say, oh, well, that's got a bit of nice stuff in there. What you do then is corrupt the whole lot. What was good is no longer good when mixed. It's that whole a little leaven leavens a lump. If you're bringing in part of a doctrine that has no compatibility with what we actually follow, you just rendered the entire doctrine completely useless. Syncretism is hugely important to avoid, because otherwise we are following a corrupted doctrine. Follow Yah's doctrine, and that doctrine alone. And if you want to know what that doctrine is, read the Word of God.
Amen.
It's right here.
Amen.
We're not following the tenets of a religion. We are following the commandments of Yah himself. Not a central organisation that's based in a church. No, God himself is our authority. So, now, just very quickly on the tzitzits. In Numbers, when it first comes up, it doesn't specify how many tzitzits we're to have. In Numbers 15:38, it just says tie tassels to the corners of your garments. Here, it specifies that we're to have 4. Now, I'm not going to start convicting people to say that they must wear 4. But all I'll say is that it's written in the Torah.
Yeah.
So, I'm not going to convict you, but read the Torah and see what comes from that. Personally, I think we should wear 4. It says it right there. But other people haven't been convicted to do the same, so that is about their relationship with their personal relationship with God and what he's convicting them for. But personally, I do think it should be 4 tzitzits. It says it right here. The 4 corners of your garments. So, that's that. Right, now we're moving on to the really heavy stuff in this, the adultery. The adultery. Verses 13 to 19. It covers false accusations of adultery. Now, adultery is considered so seriously in Torah, and is considered such a serious sin to Yah, that it's one of the few laws that were punishable by death. We know how Yah feels about adultery, because it's one of the laws that keeps on coming up. Because it's not just about the infidelity between a man and his wife. It's infidelity. It represents the infidelity between Israel and God. Between those who would follow idolatrous practices. Worshipping another God. Worshipping anything. In fact, putting anything above Yah. Putting anything above Yah is idolatry, and therefore adultery. Now people think, oh, well, what extent does idolatry go to? You can treat the Bible itself, the physical Bible, as an idol. Now, what its contents is the Word of God. Our contents is what shows us the heart of God. But anyone that's treating the physical object as the means through which closeness to God is being brought, that's wrong. It's the word itself. It's the relationship. Anyone that churches could become idols.
Yeah.
Because if you consider that the church is the only thing that can bring you closer to God, no. God can bring you closer to God. Studying his word can bring you closer to God. Putting your faith in the grace through Yeshua can bring you close to God. Tzitzit can be an idol. These can't bring us close to God. These are just an indication for us, a reminder for us to follow the commandments. The Bible is just a book. The object itself, obviously the word itself is God's voice, but the book is just an object. The church is a congregation. These are not the things that bring us close to God. They can help, but they're not the things that do. Anything that we consider that brings us close to God, that isn't God himself or his word, that's it, it's an idol. That's the really heavy thing about this. A lot of people think, oh, well, I'm not worshipping another God. Oh, I'm not even celebrating Christmas. I'm not celebrating Easter. That's fine. I'm not committing idolatry. No, if you're putting anything above God himself, even the articles of our faith, that is still idolatry. And we've got to really be careful about that.
It's all about relationship at the end of the
Exactly.
day.
Only grace and the word of God can bring us closer to God. Prayer and fasting, as you just said there, it is about our relationship with him, not an object. An object cannot bring us closer to God. Not even the church itself can bring us closer to God. The fellowship, if you're putting that fellowship above God himself as being the only means of getting to God, you've got to address that in your life. That's not to say, by the way, I'm not smearing fellowships or churches. I'm not at all, just in case there's any confusion from that. No, this is a beautiful, beautiful privilege that we have to be able to congregate in his name. But there is unfortunately a risk of people putting the fellowship above God.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to go into that full extent because it's something that can often be missed. Because we say we've got all of those idolatrous practices of Babylon out of our system, doesn't mean idolatry's gone for good. We've got to really, really weigh up in our lives what we consider to be the things that bring us closer to God. So that's why adultery is treated so harshly. But interestingly, in this one, also false accusations of adultery. Adultery is so serious that a false accusation of adultery paid quite a huge penalty. I mean, we talk about the 30 pieces of silver that Yeshua was sold for. That was a lot of money. That was a lot of money. So we're talking here about 100 pieces of silver being the fine for having made a false accusation. That shows how seriously that was considered. You've just smeared the name wrongfully of a child of Israel, of a woman of Israel. That's not on. Go on, brother.
It's in the commandments, one of the 10 words. Do not bear false witness against your neighbour.
Do not bear false witness against your neighbour. Thank you for that.
Yeah, we see in the Bible, marriage is the topic, isn't it? It's all about the covenant. It's the most important lesson we read in the Bible about marriage. Yeshua's coming back for the bride. We see people getting married all the way through Scripture. So to go and defile something that God holds so sacredly, it's taken away the book itself. Really, it's taken away his words. It's complete rebellion, isn't it?
Absolutely, and there's another element to this as well. It says that the man still had to then take that woman as wife. He couldn't put her out. And the only thing
Yeah.
that can validate a divorce is adultery.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing. So this guy doing something like this is basically trying to use the only divorceable sin as an excuse to, I've made the wrong choice here, I'll try and get out of it. Nah. You may consider that you've made the wrong choice, but God has made that choice for you, because otherwise you wouldn't have been married.
Yeah.
Whatever trials you're going through, you can't be using adultery as false accusations of adultery to get out of it. Firstly, as Tommy just reminded us, do not bear false witness is one of the 10 words. And secondly, marriage is sacrosanct. Marriage is truly a holy and blessed thing. If you don't have the respect for it to actually have some respect for the wife that you have, and just to try and get rid of her with false accusations, I'm sorry. God isn't having that. And you are then going to have a pretty bad name for yourself about having brought a false accusation.
And that's Satan himself, isn't he, the accuser? So when you come in and accusing someone of a sin they haven't committed, you are posing as the enemy. So it's just serious, isn't it?
Yeah,
serious.
Absolutely. I mean, to be fair, from verses 20 to 22, it then goes on to talk about if it becomes a true accusation, then it can be treated as adultery, and therefore is subject to the disciplinary laws of adultery. But we're not to make false witnesses.
Yeah.
We're not to make false witnesses. Certainly not in something as sanctified as marriage. That just shows a lack of respect, not only for the wife, but for God Himself, for the idea of marriage itself as well. So it's one to pay attention to that. Yes, adultery is serious, but so is false accusations of. So again, think about what we were just saying about idolatry. Don't be falsely accusing someone of idolatry if they're not. Now, again, this is where it's best to look at our own convictions rather than making accusations that may turn out to be false. It is better that we focus on what we have to focus on, what we have to change in our lives, than pointing it out in other people. As Yeshua says, remove the plank from your own eye before taking the splinter out your brother's. This is one of those things. Verses 23 to 24. Now, a lot of people, again, I've got to do a bit of an apologetic on this one. A lot of people, this is the one where it says, when a girl who is a maiden is engaged to a husband and a man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you bring him both to the gates of the city and you shall stone them to death with stones. Now, a lot of people are like, what is this? It's adultery. Again, it's still adultery. This is not. A lot of people say, "Oh, the Bible endorses rape," because it doesn't. It really doesn't. This is talking about actual willful adultery. This woman is engaged to someone and has chosen to sleep with someone else.
And engaged is the same as betrothed, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So when you're betrothed to someone, that's it. That's kind of
Yeah,
God's.
you are then going to be there.
You're not betrothed isn't the same as married, but betrothed means you're
It's to be married, so
be
it's
married,
you're
isn't
still
it?
under that whole thing. So if you're sleeping with someone that isn't who you're engaged to, then that's adultery,
Because in my version
fornication,
it
and
says
adultery.
it does say engaged rather
Yeah.
than married. You
Same
see.
thing. Engaged to marry is you're still essentially married to that person. You've been betrothed to that person. It's one of those things. Now I'm not going to go into depth about the structure of how marriages were betrothed and stuff. But all we know is if someone was betrothed, they were going to be married to that person unless there was a legitimate reason to break it off. So them committing fornication with someone who wasn't their betrothed, it's adultery.
Yeah.
But yeah, the very fact that we can draw out that this is actually referring to consensual adultery, because it makes the emphasis of not crying out. You know, if someone was being taken against their will, they would be crying out, and that statement alone implies that this particular mitzvot is referring to consensual adultery and fornication. The next verses 25 to 27, this is about the protection for rape victims. Again, this is that thing that a lot of people ignore when they read the Bible. Oh, it's vindicating rape and stuff like that. No, it is not. It says right here that the person who is punished is the rapist, the man who took advantage of the woman who couldn't cry out for help. She is protected by law. He is the one that has committed the sin. She is actually protected by that law. The next verse again, people again associate with the previous mitzvot, where so in verses 28 to 29, where it's when a man finds a girl who is a maiden who is not engaged and he seizes her and lies with her and they are found out. Again, people just automatically assume that this is still referring to rape. It's not. Again, this is then referring to fornication, premarital fornication. What we've had is a series of mitzvot that are closely related but slightly different. So one was about adultery, false accusations of adultery. Then it's about adultery. Then it's about the consensual adultery. Then it's about the actual protection for rape victims, just in case anyone got any ideas. And then this one, where it says that if a man takes a woman who's not engaged, then he has to marry that woman. Well, there was a point that I found out. It says, and they are found out. They are found out. Let's read that in context. When a man finds a girl who is a maiden and is not engaged, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out. The use of the word "they" implies that it's not just on one of those people to have made that decision. That's but on both of them. That is complicit. That is consensual. That is about premarital fornication. Now, the reason why it then commands the man to take that woman as a wife is it's better that fornication doesn't then become adultery. Because then if that woman goes on to marry someone else, not only was it fornication, but it was adultery. So to take that woman as his wife then would reduce, hopefully eliminate the risk of it becoming a further and a greater sin that was actually worthy of death. So again, that it may be a hard thing for us to read in this modern context, but again, when you look at the actual the undercurrent of what this is talking about is actually preventing further sin and thus spiritual death. It's actually a blessing. It's actually a gift of grace to that allows a way out. It's not a get-out clause as such, because it still requires those people to take responsibility for their actions. Oh, you liked each other enough to do that, so marry each other.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't like each other enough to marry each other. Tough. You've done one, you do the other.
No.
And also in life, when there's a community of believers who are living together and fellowshipping, worshipping together and all of that, there is likelihood, as you said, about the deception of the heart, that there's temptation, because there's just so many people with so much going on around, because you're not supposed to be in isolation, you're supposed to gather and worship.
Yeah, of course,
and
absolutely.
So this is, to me, it's like a worst case scenario. If this were to happen,
Yeah.
this is what you would do. If this were to happen, this is what you would do. So you'd have to think of the worst case scenario because of the deception of the heart. It could actually happen. It may not happen, but if it did happen, at least you know what to do.
Oh, the bases are covered?
And all the
Absolutely.
community would know the consequence of that as well.
This is a reflection of our lives, and we have to treat it as such. That's why it's a beautiful, beautiful thing that we have access to Bibles. Think about the times when they didn't have printed Bibles. Think about the communities and the countries that outlaw copies of the Bible, or at the very least they only allowed the state approved versions. We have this wonderful gift of having a guide to our lives and something that can help us see what we're doing wrong, or also can help us show what we're doing right, but can help us see what we're doing wrong. It is a living word. Everyone has a unique relationship with God's word. We all share things, of course. There is universal things that we share in this, but that we each have a unique and individual relationship with God's word and with God through his word, where we can... It's such a beautiful thing, such a wonderful, wonderful thing. So we're coming to the end now. I just wanted to make one link in that very last verse where it says, a man does not take his father's wife nor uncover his father's skirt. That's part of the prohibited unions that are listed elsewhere in the Bible. But just to link this to something that came way before this, Noah. One of the things that you can see in the story of Ham's sin. A lot of people are confused. They say Ham uncovered his father's nakedness. What does this mean? Well, actually, you read a little bit later on in the Levitical laws that to uncover your father is to actually sleep with his wife. To uncover your father's nakedness is to sleep with your father's wife. So when we look at what Ham did, when it says he uncovered his father's nakedness. Why is his son cursed? Well, if we look at that law, that pretty much says to me that Canaan, who came from that union, is actually a product of incest.
Yeah.
You look at that line, that particular line, and all of the nastiest nations that then followed came from that particular line. You look at the product of incest, Lot and his daughters, Ammon and Moab. Now, Ammon and Moab, they weren't told, the Israel weren't told to destroy them, but they were certainly told not to make a union with them. In fact, that comes up later on in this. Comes up in the next chapter actually. But they weren't to consider them enemies, but certainly not consider them as friends. You know, they were banned from the assembly right the way across, right to the 10th generation. So, it's all to do with minimising that incest, because we're going to skip over the next chapter because there's so much to cover. But just to link this to something that's at the start of the next chapter, it says, "A mamzer," verse 2, chapter 23, "A mamzer shall not enter the community of Yahovah." Well, a mamzer, the word mamzer means a child of a prohibited union. So we finished the previous chapter with a reminder of one of those prohibited unions. We have the story in Genesis of Ham sleeping with his father's wife as to show where these evil nations come from and the effects of this potential wrongful union. And then right here, a confirmation that someone who comes from that union wouldn't be allowed into the assembly anyway. So don't put someone in that position. Don't bring a child into this world only to then be forced out of the community of Yahovah simply through your sinful choice.
Yeah.
Whereas a little bit further down it says, don't loathe the Edomite because they're Esau. They're the descendants of Esau. They're a brother nation. And it says, don't loathe a Mitzrian. Don't loathe an Egyptian. It's like this was the country that they were captive in. But the thing is, the Egyptians didn't come from incestuous unions. It's all about making sure that no prohibited unions are happening within the nation, and these other nations form an example of that.
And this, I think, just why God's so strict here on the sort of marrying onto who's, because the Messiah had to come from the line of David, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
So if these would have had all this incest going on, the enemy would have got in and corrupted the line for the Messiah to then later come. So I think I think that at this point in time, this is why he's so serious about the bloodline. Absolutely.
There's just one point I want to make from chapter 23, because we're going to leave chapter 23 and just go on to 24 and 25 after the break. This is the last point I will make. And it's just that it says, do not loathe the Mitzrian. It's verse 23, verse 7. Do not loathe the Mitzrian, because you are a stranger in his land. The children of the third generation born to them do enter the assembly of Yahovah. Now, there's something wonderful in this, because firstly, it's like that first word, remember where you came from. You know, I am Yahovah, the God that brought you out of Egypt. Now, he's not only reminding the children of Israel there of who he is, but also where they came from. Remember that it was the leadership of Egypt that was at fault. Don't forget, the people were giving them all of these riches and stuff as they were leaving the land. In fact, some of the Egyptians even came with them. It says the mixed multitude. Don't hate the Egyptian. It was the Pharaoh that was at fault. It was the Pharaoh that was putting these evil edicts out for the treatment of the nation. But the other side of this that I actually found, this is why I wanted to share this, because something new came to me from this, and that's, don't be a poor victor. You know, we talk about the idea of being a poor loser, where you react really badly to losing. It works the other way as well. You can be a poor winner. You know, if you're one of those people who rubs it in the person's face, is like, ha ha ha, I've beat you. I'm sorry, but you've just completely null and voided your victory there because you are being arrogant about it. And do you know what? I think this law is in there not only to show respect for the people, but also to show well, think about the condition that Egypt was left in. It was destroyed.
Yeah.
It was completely and utterly destroyed by by the Hebrews leaving. God completely destroyed their land because of pulling the Hebrews out. That's pretty intense. They weren't supposed to hate the people. They were supposed to, if anything, have compassion for the people who were left in that condition for the sake of what Pharaoh intended.
Yeah.
Egypt, they were supposed to have compassion for Egypt. To the point that, look, the Moabite and the Ammonite weren't ever allowed into the assembly because of the roots of their nations. The Egyptian, after the 3rd generation, they were allowed in. It was almost like they were allowed that 3 generations to recover from what had gone before. So we will leave it there. We'll take a break now. Thank you all for your patience, and looking forward to finishing it off later on. So,
Bless you, brother.
hallelujah. Okay, so we're going to skip over chapter 23 and go straight to 24, but we need to cover 24 and 25 in this part, so we'll crack on. Tommy, would you like to read chapter 24 for us?
When a man takes a wife and shall marry her, then it shall be, if she finds no favour in his eyes, because he has found a matter of uncoveredness in her, and he shall write her a certificate of divorce, and put it in her hand, and send her out of his house. And if she left his house and went and became another man's wife, and the latter husband shall hate her, and write her a certificate of divorce, and put it in her hand, and send her out of his house. Or when the latter husband dies, who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her back to be his wife, after she has been defiled, for that will be an abomination before Yahweh. And do not bring sin on the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you as an inheritance. When a man has taken a new wife, let him not go out into the army, nor let any matter be imposed upon him. He shall be exempt 1 year for the sake of his home, to rejoice with his wife whom he has taken. No one takes in pledge the lower or the upper millstone, for he will be taking a life in pledge. When a man is found kidnapping any of his brothers of the children of Israel, and treats him harshly or sells him, then that kidnapper shall die. Thus you shall purge the evil from your midst. Take heed, in an outbreak of leprosy, to diligently guard and do according to all that the priests, the Levites, teach you. As I have commanded them, so you shall guard to do. Remember what Yahweh your Elohim did to Miriam on the way when you came out of Egypt. When you lend your brother alone, do not go into his house to get his pledge. Stand outside and let the man to whom you lend bring the pledge out to you. And if the man is poor, do not sleep with his pledge. By all means return the pledge to him at sundown, and he shall sleep in his own garment, and shall bless you, and it shall be righteousness to you before Yahweh your Elohim. Do not oppress a hired servant who is poor and needy, of your brothers or of the strangers who is in your land within your gates. Give him his wages on the same day, and do not let the sun go down on it, for he is poor and lifts up his being to it, so that he does not cry out against you to Yah, and it shall be sin in you. Fathers are not put to death for their children, and children are not put to death for their fathers. Each is to die for his own sin. Do not twist the right ruling of a stranger or the fatherless, nor take the garment of a widow. But you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and that Yahweh your Elohim redeemed you from there. Therefore I am commanding you to do this word. When you reap your harvest in your field, and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, do not go back to get it. let it be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow, so that Yahweh your Elohim might bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, do not examine the branch behind you. Let it be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, do not glean behind you. Let it be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I am commanding you to do this word.
Amen.
Selah. Amen. So, chapter opens up, verses 1 to 4, with the divorce law. What we talked very briefly about before. This is the only thing for which a husband and wife could become divorced. Adultery. But there's something extremely significant about this particular law, because it is linked directly to Yeshua. I'd like you to turn to Romans 7 and it's verses 1 to 6.
Or do you not know, brothers and sisters, for I speak to those who know law, that the law is master over a person as long as he lives? For the married woman is bound by law to her husband while he lives, but if the husband dies, she is released from the law concerning the husband. So then, if she is joined to another man while her husband is living, she will be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is free from the law, so she is not an adulteress, though she is joined to another man. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you also were made dead to the Torah through the body of Messiah, so that you might be joined to another, the one who was raised from the dead, in order that we might bear fruit for God. For when we were in the flesh, the sinful passions that came through the Torah were working in our body parts to bear fruit for death.
Thank you. Now I'd like you to go to Jeremiah 3 and it's verse 8. And I saw that for all the causes for which backsliding Israel had committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. Yeshua had to go to the cross so that we could be given the renewed covenant.
That's right.
Without Yeshua's death, we could not have been offered a new covenant because of that very law in Deuteronomy. Which is, it's quite a powerful thing, that so that we could be offered that covenant with Yahovah again, he sent Yeshua to die. That's quite heavy when you really put some thought to it. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was a young man in the church, it was easy to say, "Oh yeah, Jesus died for our sins." Fantastic. Get on with the day now. But when you think of it in the sense that he willingly gave himself up just so that we could be offered this new covenant, this renewed covenant, should really make us think about what we are doing to honour that covenant. Yeah. We, Israel, had been divorced for all of their adultery, their whoring, their idolatry. God sent Yeshua to die so that he could then reconnect with his people. That's love. Yes. That's not just like, I'll see you later then. I'll find another nation that I can make a covenant with. He persevered. He persevered. And we can even look at this in the sense of how far are we willing to go to forgive within a marriage? You know, what are we willing to forgive? Is there a point where you'd say, oh, I'm not going to forgive that? If so, what did God do? to what extent did he go to forgive us?
So if you go to 1 Corinthians, chapter 2, is it? 2:8.
I'll go from verse 7. But we speak the wisdom of Elohim, which was hidden in a secret, and which Elohim ordained before the ages for our esteem, which no one of the rulers of this age knew, for if they had known, they would not have impaled the master of esteem.
Yeshua, at his own crucifixion, achieved many things, and one of them was to remarry his bride.
Amen.
And if the demons had known, they would never have entertained it, but they did not to know. And there's confirmation there in 1 Corinthians.
Thank you for sharing that, because that really does emphasise the point that's being made here. Someone died for you, but not just someone, anyone. God himself sent Yeshua, his son, to die for us so that he could come back together with us.
We're just to die either. Like, the way I think of it is like, death happens in so many ways, but the way Yeshua was killed, bro, was like the worst of the worst. And you know, he went through that for us. Like, and even when he was on the cross, bro, like I was saying to Jack or Tommy the other day, that he was still, you know, when he was getting laughed at and spat at and poo thrown at him and stuff like that, and he was still saying, forgive them.
Yeah.
You mean?
But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our crookedness. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and his stripes, and through his stripes we are healed.
Yeah.
Thank God for Yeshua.
Praise you.
And God he raised from the dead as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Come back.
A new groom to take a new bride. Amen. Amen. I just think that's an incredible thing. It's. I mean, you could just dwell on that point alone, couldn't you? That's just the first four verses of one chapter. So, yeah, it's a powerful one. That one. That's the extent of love that we've been given. Verse 5 is something that we covered last week. It's actually it's actually a reassertion of what was said about the stipulations for people going to war. If they'd been married for that first year, they weren't allowed to be sent to war. But you say, well, okay, why has this been reiterated here? Why has it been reiterated in this chapter with none of the other stipulations? It's because I personally believe that this is because this is related to the idea of getting rid of as many things that could cause adultery as possible. Think about it. If a man goes to war, he's away. If his marriage hasn't been consummated, that woman may feel inclined to seek that consummation elsewhere. So by allowing the husband and wife to spend that first year together, it means that they can set up a solid base of love and respect, as well as consecrating their marriage to be treated holy. I mean, Paul says it's better to marry than be at risk of committing adultery.
Yeah, and also the man who's away, you know, he's going to war. You know, a lot of people can get an attitude that they might not come back. So just the people who they're wiping out, obviously there's going to be women there as well, isn't there? So it's for both sides, isn't it?
There was a sad trope that came up in the wars of the 20th century, the Dear John letters, where troops would receive their Dear John letter from their partner saying, sorry, I was waiting for you, but I'm not now. I've met someone in my hometown that didn't go to war. I'm having them instead. How heartbreaking is that? Go on, brother.
When a man's taking a new wife, then it goes on to say, he shall be exempt 1 year for the sake of his home to rejoice with his wife whom he is taken. If 1,000 years is like a day to God, and when Yeshua returns, that one day is the Sabbath.
Oh wow, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The seventh day.
So he dwells with his bride before the great judgment, and then that's an amazing thought, that actually. Wow, I didn't see that. Thank you. Right, yes, sorry, let's move on. Verse 6. No one takes in pledge the lower orp and millstone, for he will be taking a life in pledge. Now, some people have expressed confusion as to what this means. But you've got to think of old grain, wheat, flour production processes. The millstone would be, there'd be two big stone circular discs. One would sit on top of the other, and they'd put the grain on the bottom millstone, and they would have this really heavy matching disc that would slot on top, and they would turn a handle in, it would grind. Now, most houses, certainly those who were linked to like the wheat production and stuff like that, they would have had one of these. Now, a pledge is what's given to someone or taken from someone to signify that they will pay whatever debt they own. But to take someone's millstone, whether it's the top or the bottom, is to basically take away their means of producing food. Or if not producing their own food, their livelihood. So that's what it means by we'll be taking a life in pledge, because you're taking the means of someone's sustenance, whether financial or food, away from them simply for the sake of repaying debt. Again, this follows a trend. Every single one, when I was reading this over the course of the week, there was some huge themes in this. I don't want to give them away too much because I want it to be a big reveal at the end, but they're huge. And this is, I feel blessed that it's been this parsha that I've been called to step in for, because what a humbling experience it is to see the Father's heart throughout this one. But we'll get to that. 7. When a man is found kidnapping any of his brothers. Right. What is kidnapping if not the devaluation of someone's life into what you can simply get for that life, whether it's money or material gain? This person isn't a life. This person is a meal ticket. This person is a means of me getting some money.
Slavery.
I mean, even then, even just kidnapping for ransom, that how much is that person worth? It's a devaluation of life.
Yeah.
And that is why it is highlighted here as a really heavy sin.
Yeah.
But it shows, kidnapping someone shows that you don't value that they are a living being.
Yeah.
They are a monetary value to you. And therefore, this devaluation of life, because it's been seeking gain from someone else as well, seeking gain from someone else's expense. Yeah, doesn't like that, and you look at the punishment for it, death. Very, very serious. Verse 8, we've covered in the past. It's about the laws to do with the leprosy, and it doesn't go into the spiritual leprosy, and it doesn't go into full breakdown here, but in Leviticus it breaks down the processes that they would need to go through for cleansing the leprosy away. So we'll skip over that one for the moment. Again, verse 9, just a mid-chapter reminder to never forget what Yah's done for us. Never forget. We can get lost in all of these prohibitory laws that we can sometimes forget. Oh, and there was this as well. So I love that was put in there as like a mid-chapter reminder. Don't forget, God's good. God's good. Now, interestingly, 10 to 13, you look at the modern Babylonian debt system. It is nothing like the Torah. It is all, in Torah, it is all about preserving the dignity of the one in debt. Now you look at this, it says, when you lend your brother a loan, do not go into his house to get the pledge, stand outside and let the man whom you lend bring the pledge out to you. Respect that man's property, allow him to still have the dignity over his household. Certainly puts the codes of practice of bailiffs into perspective, doesn't it? God doesn't command not to lend. In fact, this is something that came up in chapter 23 that I might as well just very briefly go back to. It doesn't say that someone shouldn't make a profit through money lending. It doesn't say that you should never be a money lender. You know, at the end of the day, the profit is often what allows people to get their sustenance. But it says, don't lend at interest to a brother. To brothers and sisters, that is a gift of charity and love, compassion and support. Fair enough, if that's your business, if money lending is your business, then yeah, the people from other nations, that's fine. Yeah, make your profit. As long as you're fair with them, make your profit, that's okay. But to a brother, to a sister, it's charity. It wasn't a loan, it was a gift of grace. But this really sort of puts some extra weight onto the ethics that one should use in lending. Don't force your way into someone. Allow someone the space to pay back what they owe in a dignified manner. Respect. It's respect. Again, it's all to do with respect. I mean, we even have employment law here. We even talk, it even has in this parsha the fair treatment of employees. You look at this, it says you've got to pay them on the same day. So people would have been paid. So yeah, verse 15, give him his wages on the same day and do not let the sun go down on it. Those wages are that person's means of surviving. They need that. So what are you doing unnecessarily holding back their means of sustenance? That's cruelty. Fair enough, obviously, if it's a case of you're unable to give that person the wage for whatever reason, then that's a different matter. What this is specifically talking about is being unwilling to pay someone for the work that they've done. Credit where credit's due, wages where wages are due. We should never deny someone what we owe them for what they've done for us. Wages are something that God considers quite important. Again, back in chapter 23, it was from the wages that people would pay their tithe. I mean, back in chapter 23, it talks about the importance of bringing certain or not bringing certain types of wages to God. You can't bring the wage of sin. You can't bring the money that has been earned through being a prostitute, for example, as an offering to Yahovah. He says categorically in chapter 23, don't do that. So the laws around wages are actually still pretty significant. You know, that is ethical management. That is ethical employee management. Give people what they're owed. I mean, Bibi was telling me one of the problems with certain jobs in Mexico is you will get paid, you just don't know when. Yeah. That doesn't help you live. No. That doesn't help you feed your family. This is all about, again, coming back to that idea of respecting someone's dignity and understanding that their life has as much value as yours. Just because you're paying them their wage doesn't make you any better than them. Those employees are blessing that employer with the means of that employer doing what they do. So then, from receiving that blessing, it is right to give that blessing back. You know, we are blessed to give out blessings. We're not blessed for our own benefit. We are given blessings so that we can pass that blessing on to others. It's like a lot of people are under this impression that marriage is all about happiness. No. Marriage is about fulfilling what Yah told you to do. You've been brought together because you serve a greater purpose in Yah's kingdom. The happiness that we get from marriage is a wonderful side effect. It's a wonderful blessing that we get from that. But we don't have that situation simply for the sake of being happy within ourselves. It's to pass the blessing on to other people. It's to bless other people through your union in the same way that literally any blessing that you have, give it to someone else as soon as you possibly can. Yeah. Because that's what that blessing is there for. We are custodians, not really recipients. If we choose not to bless someone, what blessing are we going to be denied later on? You know?
I guess that's in Matthew, when to go out and heal the sick, it says, give freely, for as you were given freely.
Amen. And Acts says, it's better to give than to receive, than ask me away.
Absolutely. Yeah, very two excellent scriptural links there. Yeshua himself promoted this very idea. I mean, look at the blessings that we get through Yeshua alone. So, you know, let's keep that in mind.
I was just going to say, you know, when Yeshua says, if you look at a woman with lust, that you commit adultery,
Yes.
or if you hate a brother, it's like murder. And I think if you take the same kind of principle with tithing, you know, like Yeshua is calling us to so much more than just what's written in the Torah. He's trying to call us to be completely all about love, which is giving, and not about needing love and taking. And so with tithing, if we think about money as all the Lord's, and you know, we'll only spend it on what the Lord wants us to spend it on, I think it's so much more than just that 10%, isn't it? It's the mindset
absolutely.
of just like, this isn't even for me, it's just for
Wow.
it's for everybody else.
In fact, funny enough, this was also something that I was discussing when I was sat back here last time. It's an amazing thing. I mean, if you read Malachi, for example, Malachi is a pretty heavy book to read because it's all about the offerings that were denied God. If you read Malachi chapter 3, my goodness, it doesn't just refer to not paying tithe as not paying tithe. It's stealing from Yahovah. But then it goes on to say, Yahovah says, test me in this, I will bless your resources. Bibi came out with a really good point when she was talking about this herself. When she says, it's not about you getting more or less money. If you've got a fixed wage, you're going to get that same amount of money every month. It's how far it goes when you have your resources blessed by God. It is about having that blessing from God. So how do you say thank you for that blessing from God? You give that blessing straight back.
Yeah, one good point I just remembered, what Vivi was saying was that it withholds the enemy from creating them potholes in your life. So, you know, if you're withholding your tithe, next thing your toilet needs fixing that hinges on your doors going before you know it. That £450 that you've got feels like £200.
It's about blessing our resources. We've been blessed with those, so we've got to bless people back. Don't forget as well, just to reaffirm this, the tithe goes to the operation of the tabernacle. The tithe goes to the operation of the ministry. We are blessing the ministry with the blessing that God has given us. You know what I mean? Then the ministry can pass that blessing on to the people that they minister to. And then those people can pass on that blessing by witnessing to other people. It's endless. It's an infinite cycle of blessing that should never be stopped.
It's all about keeping the life going, isn't it? That's what we're seeing in all of these with you know, keeping the mother alive so she can still have more offspring.
Yes.
With the time, it's all about just life basically. Keep her continually going.
Absolutely. It's an amazing thing. It's that we follow a law written by God that champions. We sort of live in the age of human rights and stuff like that, and people say, "Oh, this is the best." You know, we've never had things like that. It's right here. Fair treatment of other people is one of the biggest points of Torah. You know, you look at that Leviticus, that passage in Leviticus that Yeshua adds to the Shema, and we must love our neighbour as we love ourselves. You cannot love God without loving your neighbour. You cannot love your neighbour without loving God. Respect for life. It's huge. Verse 16. Fathers are not put to death for their children, and children are not put to death for their fathers. Each is to die for his own sin. Accountability. Responsibility. We are responsible for ourselves. Absolutely. No one else is going to be punished for what we have done beyond the age of accountability. We are responsible adults and will be treated as such. If we make a stupid decision, it is on our heads. But don't forget, we have the covering of grace. We have a Father in heaven and the bridegroom Yeshua to nullify any of the bad vows we've made. So we can put our trust in that. But I just like that little verse's inclusion because it shows that no one's going to get punished for someone else's sin. We are personally responsible. Absolutely. So, and then 17 to 22. I'm not going to go through it all, but the gist of it is look out for the vulnerable. Have a heart for the poor, for the widow, for the fatherless. There are so many. I mean, I had a huge list. I mean, a huge list of verses, chapters and verses that were just covering this idea of looking out for people, looking out for those who are vulnerable, looking out for them. There was too many to include. It's right the way through scriptures. We've got to consider those less fortunate than us. We have to give our thanks to God every day for the comfort, for the sustenance, and for the joy that we can feel in our lives. But with that, we also need to remember those who do not have that. We will each know somebody or meet somebody that will need us to be a witness to that. Because people are in that position not because God put them in that position, because the world put them in that position, or because through their own mistakes they put themselves in that position. We've still got to have compassion for that. If we have the means of helping, it is our duty to help. This is where it starts talking about offerings. We can't give our tithe to the poor because the tithe is for the operation of the ministry. But it is our duty as followers of Yeshua, as keepers of the Torah, that we make as many charitable offerings to those who need it as possible. But again, it's with dignity. Allow the person to keep their dignity. This is not necessarily just saying, handing them some money and being done with it. Sometimes it's a case of teaching them how to do something so they can facilitate their own. I know people who will not accept gifts of money, even if they need it, because they are proud. And they are unsettled by the appearance that accepting money for help gives them. There's other ways those people can be helped. So it's not just a simple case of palming someone off with some money. That's not charity.
And something I think Joe always highlights as well is that if you don't accept a blessing off someone, if you don't accept, when someone's trying to help you, you're actually stealing them of a blessing, because they might have been put on their heart to tithe this money to you. So if you're not accepting that, you're stealing them of a blessing.
But then again, this is why it's up to the person blessing to choose the blessing appropriately. Maybe the person has reacted badly because the blessing has sparked something that really draws up some pain that they just don't feel like they can accept. If you try to understand that person before just giving an offering, because again, don't forget the tithe is not to be given in charity, that's the offering. When we make the offering, we're supposed to have a degree of responsibility about this offering. Again, it's not just throwing something at someone being, there you are, you're sorted now.
Brotherly love,
it's brotherly love. It's knowing what they need. Get to know what that person truly needs so you can tailor that blessing so that, as we said before, it doesn't encourage dependency or embarrassment. You know what I mean? So sometimes if you say, don't just refuse a blessing because it takes the blessing away, that's flipping it around. That's almost like, the blessing equivalent of victim blaming. We've got to be careful with things like that, because someone may have rejected a blessing because it's the wrong blessing. It may be the right thing to do, but in the wrong way. You know what I mean? This is why we are not, this blessing someone is not just a simple case of going up to someone and saying, bless you. We've got to know what blessing we're giving. We've got to understand what that person is going through, who that person is. If you know someone's proud, you can't just bless them with money because they're not going to accept it. You've got to give them the right blessing. If you instead teach them how to do something that they can then, monetize, gain some capital from, then that's a bigger blessing than just simply handing them some money. You know what I mean? You see where I'm coming from with that? It's about knowing what blessings you're giving, not just blessing willy-nilly. We're to have care in these things, because we're looking out for people that we know, even people that we don't. We've got to be careful that we don't undermine either them or even ourselves in how we give. But we are commanded to bless. So bless, please, but also just think about how you're blessing. So yeah, wisdom. Wisdom underlines everything, but how do we get wise? Word of God. Prayer, fasting, anything that strengthens our connection with the Most High. So yeah, I love that chapter in the sense that it really does look out for the vulnerable. It's one that really highlights Yah's heart for those who struggle. But we'll move on to chapter 25 now. This is the last chapter of the parsha.
When there is a dispute between men, then they shall come unto judgment, and they shall be judged, and the righteous declared righteous, and the wrongdoer declared wrong. And it shall be, if the wrongdoer is to be beaten, that the judge shall cause him to lie down, and be beaten in his presence, with the number of blows according to his wrong. 40 blows he gives him, but no more, lest he beat him with many more blows than these, and your brother be degraded before your eyes. Do not muzzle an ox while it is threshing. When brothers dwell together, and one of them has died, and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not become a stranger outside. Her husband's brother does go into her, and shall take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears does rise up for the name of his dead brother, so that his name is not blotted out of Israel. But if the man does not desire to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate to the elders, and say, My husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He does not agree to perform the duty of my husband's brother. The elders of his city shall then call him and speak to him, and he shall stand and say, I have no desire to take her. Then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, and remove his sandals from his foot, and shall spit in his face, and answer and say, Thus it is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And in Israel his name shall be called, the house of him who had his sandal removed. When men fight with one another, and the wife of one shall draw near to rescue her husband from the hand of the one attacking him, and shall put out her hand and seize him by the genitals, then you shall cut off her hand. Your eye does not pardon. You shall not have in your bag differing weights, heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and right weight, a perfect and right measure, so that they prolong your days on the soil which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you. For all who do these, and all who do unrighteously, are an abomination to Yahweh your Elohim. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you on the way and attacked your back, all the feeble ones in your ear, when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear Elohim. Therefore it shall be, when Yahweh your Elohim has given you rest from your enemies all around, in the land which Yahweh your Elohim has given you to possess as an inheritance, that you blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under the heavens. Do not forget.
Selah, Selah. 1 to 3. In fact, I'll just highlight what it says in verse 3 in particular. 40 strikes he gives him, but no more, lest he strike him with many more blows than these, and your brother be degraded before your eyes. Discipline is very important to the Father. That's why he tells us how to live. Some things require punishment, some wrongdoing. But right here, it talks about the difference between punishment and degradation. Someone being punished is righteous, but allows them to pick themselves back up and continue on in the right direction. It's justice. It's measured. But there is a difference between then that means of punishment being used to dehumanize and degrade someone. This very law here would again preserve the self-esteem and the dignity of the children of Israel. Makes it all the more heartbreaking that Yeshua wasn't afforded the same privilege, because at first he was only supposed to be beaten a little, not scourged, but he was. The Romans don't follow the Torah, so they didn't have this law. But they themselves, Israel, was supposed to be different to other nations. Yes, they were to have punishments. Yes, they were supposed to have disciplinary justice. But never at the expense of someone's dignity. Never at the expense of someone's self-esteem. Of course, you're always going to have a bit of a knock in self-esteem if you've done something wrong, been caught for it, been punished for it. But that's very different to actually just dehumanising someone through beating them. So I think that's an incredible inclusion in the law. The law that stipulates how things must be not only done, but also if done wrong, punished. But here, it is still about preserving life. So I just wanted to highlight that one. I think that's incredible. And then the next verse, do not muzzle an ox while it's threshing. The dignity of animals too. We were looking at that before. We were looking at that with we were talking about the bird's nest and taking the mother also. It's about preserving life, all life. The sanctity of all life. So, again, I love that the Torah specifies that we are supposed to have some respect for this, for these things. So fantastic. Right, 5 to 10. This is the one where the widow has to be married by her brother-in-law, and then the family name continued on as if it was the husband. So the firstborn of the brother-in-law is counted as the firstborn of the husband. Now, there's a reason why I want to highlight this one. The law itself is specifically referring to brothers who are living together, and the ultimate outcome of it is tribal unity. You think back in Numbers 27, we had the daughters of Zelophehad come to Moses and say, look, our father died in the wilderness, and we now have to marry, so we don't get his inheritance. His inheritance disappears. So there was a law put in place and then embellished later on to preserve tribal unity. You're given that land as a tribe. Back in the Jubilee, whatever land or property you've bought elsewhere reverts back to the person who was given that in their inheritance, and you go back to yours. It's the same with this mitzvot itself. It's to preserve tribal unity. It's actually also directly addressed in Genesis 38 with the story of Tamar and Judah. But that is not why I want to highlight this one. I've been looking forward to bringing a particular book into the parshas for a little while now, because it's one of my favourite stories. But it's I'd like you all to turn to Ruth chapter 4, please. And Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. And see, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. And Boaz said, turn aside, so-and-so, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city, and he said, sit down here. So they sat down. He then said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the fields of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. And I thought that I should disclose it to you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you do redeem it, redeem it. But if you do not redeem it, inform me, so that I know. For there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you. And he said, I redeem it. And Boaz said, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you shall also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead on his inheritance. And the Redeemer said, I am not able to redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. Redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I am not able to redeem it. And this was formerly done in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging, to confirm every word. One man took off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was a witness in Israel. So the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. Then he took off his sandal And Boaz said to the elders and to all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech, and all that was Kilion's and Mahlon's from the hands of Naomi. And also Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife to raise up the name of the dead on his inheritance, so that the name of the dead should not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his place. You are all witnesses today." And all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "Witnesses, Yahovah, make the woman who is come into your house as Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Yisrael, and prove your worth in Ephrathah, and proclaim the name in Bethlehem." Now, if you're not familiar with the story of Ruth, it concerns a Moabite called Ruth, who was married to a son of an Israelite woman, Naomi. That was the Naomi that we heard of. And unfortunately, both of Naomi's sons dies. I think, in fact, it's two Moabites. Both of her sons are married to Moabite women. And unfortunately, both of her sons die without leaving an heir. So this is where this law comes into place. Ruth follows her mother-in-law. The two daughters-in-law actually follow the mother, but one of them turns back. Naomi releases them both. But Ruth chooses to follow. Ruth chooses to continue to call Naomi mother. And when she returns back to where Naomi is returned to, her original house, she falls in love with one of the princes of the tribes, Boaz. But of course, Boaz can't take Ruth in marriage, because Ruth has to be taken by the nearest relative to the sons of Naomi. But this guy, Boaz, he knew that he could do right by Ruth. He knew that he could bring her something special, but he also knew he had to ascribe to the law of the Torah here, where it talks about the idea of passing on that sandal, passing on the mantle of carrying on the brother-in-law's family. So it's quite interesting how he does it, because he starts by talking about the land inheritance that the guy will receive, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'll have that, fantastic, yeah. This the so and so is my copy of the Bible refers to him as." And then when he then stipulates the fact that it comes with a wife, he's like, "Oh, no, it'll ruin my own inheritance then, because then I'll have to split it between me and her. No, I'll sack it, because then I'll have to give it to my children." So this is the point where Boaz makes that exchange of sandals and stuff like this. Now you wonder, okay, why have I brought Ruth into this? Yes, okay, it's a biblical example of this law coming into place. Can anyone tell me who Ruth was an ancestor of? David.
Yeah.
David. Ruth and Boaz's union led to King David. And as we know, where does Yeshua come from? The line of King David. Now, there was an interesting thing pointed out to me by Tommy yesterday that I hadn't considered, but is a wonderful thing to keep in mind. The name Ruth, the word Ruth, means grace. Now, what had we just talked about with the Moabites and the Ammonites? They weren't allowed into the assembly, ever. But hang on, there's a Moabite woman here becoming grafted in to become the ancestor of King David, who is the ancestor of Yeshua. Grace. Right the way through. That law might seem pretty strange in our modern context if we look at it only in the context of how we understand things. But again, it's that whole tribal union. But again, that law being in place enabled grace to be given to someone who was named Grace, who would then become, I think, the great-great-grandmother of King David himself. What a beautiful God we have, that he would put something in place way back when to enable something beautiful now.
Mark, when you were talking about giving, before, about being blessing,
yes,
sharing your blessing, And it said, when harvesting the grain in your field, and when you beat your olive tree, when you gather grapes from your vine rods, set some aside if you drop any. That reminded me of Ruth as well, because that's exactly what she had to do. She had to glean, didn't she?
She was picking up the gleanings, that absolutely.
Basically scraps, as it were, that were the leftovers. That reminded me of the story of Ruth.
It was Boaz that gave her compassion, because the other men were trying to chase her away, weren't they? And Boaz was like, no, let her have it. I love that story. I love that book. I can highly recommend that if for whatever reason you've not read the book of Ruth, read it. Yeah. It's beautiful. And again shows Elohim's heart for his people and for the other nations as well. That's an amazing thing, that someone who should never have been included in the assembly was grafted in. Incredible. Now, there's an example of this law actually coming up again in the Gospels. Matthew 22, 23 to 33 raises the story of the Sadducees bringing this very law to Yeshua. In fact, this actually backs up a point that Tommy made before. They bring this law to Yeshua saying, okay, so if a man remarries, who's he going to get resurrected then? Who's he going to get resurrected with? And the whole thing with the Sadducees is they didn't believe in the resurrection. The old joke is the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. That's why they were sad, you see. But it's an interesting point that goes back to what Tommy was saying before about the law being used and twisted and turned around. These Sadducees were only bringing up this law to mock Yeshua, not to truly, really, and honestly try to understand what was being talked about there. But it also shows that the people who are focusing on what happens after death are missing the point of our scriptures. Yeah. There was a point I was raising before that there's a lot of debates as to what happens after death. Now I'm not gonna put that in here now, because that's a huge topic. But just as a point to make, the Bible doesn't really very often talk about what happens after death. You think, why has the church been banging on about heaven and hell? Well, don't forget, certain roots of certain denominations come directly from the Roman death cults. It's all about what happens after death. We are not in a faith that is about death, but about life. As Yeshua says in that very passage, we don't follow the God of the dead, we follow the God of the living. Maybe if you're focusing too much about what happens after death, you're forgetting to focus on what happens during this life. We are given this word of God now so that we can attain or strive to attain the righteousness that God expects of us, that God wants of us, that God gave us Yeshua to be able to work towards. Here, we've got to prepare now. When we're there, it's too late. And if we're focusing on what's happening over there, then what are we missing right now? It's life and not death we're supposed to be focusing on. Focus on getting ourselves right. Yeshua says on the Sermon on the Mount, don't worry about tomorrow because today has its own evils. Yeah. Worry about the life you're living today, that you are walking righteously today, that you are following the conviction that the Ruach within each of us is given us today. Amen. Don't focus on what happens after death. We can presume upon grace. Grace through Yeshua. We know that we're saved. But that's why we've got to try and live righteously now. That's why we follow the Torah. We follow the Torah so that we can clean our lives up now, that we may be prepared for that moment. But if we're putting all of our focus in that moment, we're looking too far ahead. What are we stumbling at our feet? And I just think that's an important thing to consider in what Yeshua is saying there.
I was going to say, if our only drive in what we're doing is to get some sort of reward or to avoid some sort of punishment after death, it's still very much kind of out of a place of self-preservation, and it's all about me and blessing, isn't it?
Exactly.
The call of Christ and what we're called to is to become love so that we can be completely other-focused and be love rather than all about selfish ambition and things like that.
Exactly. Where does it say in 1 Corinthians 13 that love is all about self-preservation? It doesn't. Love is about giving more than receiving. You know, what greater love is there than a man to lay down his life for his friends?
Yeah.
That is an ultimate giving. So we're not supposed to focus on what's going to happen later. We focus on what we're doing now. Live righteously, follow Torah, worship and praise the God above, Yahovah Most High, and thank Him every day for Yeshua.
Amen.
But focus on today.
Hallelujah.
Verses 11 to 12. I know this one bothered me for a little while, but I think I've got a bit more understanding on it these days. It says, when men fight with one another, a man and his brother, and the wife of one shall draw near to rescue her husband from the hand of the one striking him, and shall put out her hand and take hold of him by the genitals. Now there's a couple of different ways you can read this, one way or the other, and both work. The first one is if it's referring to her grabbing the genitals in terms of sex, well, firstly that's adultery, straight off. That's not a way to resolve a fight. There are ways of solving disputes stated in Torah. Adultery is not one of them. Adultery is not one of them, and therefore must be treated as such. But there's another way of looking at this. Even if we look at this in the sense of her grabbing that area as a means of attack.
Yeah, it stops him from having kids.
If she damages his reproductive organs, that's his family done. She is then, well, firstly, she's touched something that doesn't belong to her, for a start.
Yeah.
And secondly, she is taken it upon herself to solve a dispute by rendering someone impotent. That's not good.
It's the common theme we're seeing in this Torah portion is preservation of life, isn't it?
Preservation of life. Absolutely. In fact, we're very nearly at the end, so we're going to wrap it all up with that very, very soon. But 13 to 15, I think 13 to 15 is the last that I wanted to highlight, because 16 to 19, the last four verses of the parsha, they're a reminder of the wickedness of the nations that they are going in to destroy. You know, and if anybody's getting cold feet at that time, if anybody's starting to feel a little bit more softened up, it's a case of, no, remember what Amalek did. Yeah, there you go. Get fired up and go destroy them. So that was just a sort of a point that concludes the parsha. But this here, 13 to 15, you shall not have in your bag different weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and right weight, a perfect and right measure, so that they prolong your days on the soil which Yahovah your Elohim is giving to you. Fair weights and measures. How often have we ourselves done something through favoritism?
Yeah.
You've given someone a slightly, let's say, reduced punishment for whatever they did wrong because you're friends with them, but then gone full whack on someone else. How many times have you lent generously to one person because you like them more, but then lend not so much to someone else? How often have we used inconsistent means of dealing with people? We are not supposed to have bias. Does God treat us with bias? No. Every one of us is treated in the same manner by Elohim. Not in exactly the same ways, because each of our lives, He tailors what He gives to each of us, but not one of us is more highly favoured than the other. We can take ourselves out of His covering. We could take ourselves away from His favour. But He, in how He treats us, He is a fair and just God. You look at all of the scriptures where it talks about the great white throne judgment, and we talk about Yeshua's judgment. It doesn't say He's going to judge in bias. Oh, He's going to judge members of Israel like this, and He's going to judge the Midianites like that, and He's going to judge the Americans like this, and the British like that. No. We're humans. We're human beings. He's going to treat each of us fairly and with the same balance in its weights and measures, no bias. We have to have consistency. How else are we supposed to witness to people? One of the biggest things that turned me away from the faith when I lost my faith in my teenage years was the inconsistency of people in the church. One person in the church would be like, oh yeah, Jesus saves, fantastic. And then he'd be going, like, sleeping with other people's girlfriends outside of church and laughing and joking about it. It wasn't even something he did because he was drunk and had remorse. This guy had completely uneven balance of things. So I was like, nah, if that's Christianity, I'm not. So what are we saying to other people when we are inconsistent? When we use unfair weights and measures? We are witnessing to people with our very actions, not with what we say. What we say can be very easily ignored. I mean, I know I can easily ignore the words of someone. Can't ignore the behaviour though. You could tell a kid not to do something, but if that child sees you doing that thing that you told them not to, children learn with this more so than this. Pay attention how we are witnessing to the people of the world, because it is consistency that will show them the consistency of the God that has brought us closer to him. We bring people closer to God through being like him. One of the commandments is do not take my name in vain, do not take his name in vain. That means not to carry his name falsely. We're acting inconsistently, then we're carrying his name falsely, because God isn't inconsistent. Inconsistency is a fault of flesh, not God. So we've got to make sure that we are a representation, as Yeshua was a representation. Now, we will never be able to live up to the perfection of Yeshua, not while we're here, but we've got to try. We have to try and attain this, because this is about this, like everything else in this parsha, it's about respect for dignity. Using fair weights and measures. Alright, okay, you're more inclined to be more fair to your family than to a stranger. But again, what is that saying about your respect for the dignity of that stranger? That you would consider them less? That you would talk to them in a more condescending way, or however you're interacting with them? Fair weights and measures. Don't treat people with bias. Don't treat people with a lack of respect for their dignity. I would hope that every single person in this room talks to the people that they come across in the world in the same way that you talk to one of us. The same way that you talk to me. I would hope that you talk to other people like that. Now, I'm saying I'm guilty of this myself, of using bias. But remember, this is in the Torah. We've got to work on this. We've got to work on being consistent. Now, fortunately, this isn't punished by death. So we've got some time to work on it. But we must, because this is as important as how we represent God. We can turn someone away from God through inconsistency in our behaviour, just as I was all those years ago. I think it's massive. I think that's the reason why it's so important to me, is because it's something that I actually went through myself, and I can understand how it can impact someone who is unsure in their faith.
I think it's interesting the words that you use: heavy, light, big and small as well. So sometimes it can be something heavy. You're literally putting a burden on someone if you're not giving them enough. And then making it light, it's a bit light-hearted or light in the weight when it should be a bit heavy, do you know what I mean? With consequence. And big and small is big things and small things in your life as well. It's just the big things that you could be have favouritism, and even the small things. God notices the small things.
Oh yeah.
Too.
In fact, do you know, some of the most dangerous iniquities we have are the little ones, because it's easy to focus on the big things in our life that need changing. But if we don't keep a check on the little things as well, they're going to be the ones that undercut us later on, because they still need changing. Just because they're smaller than this big thing doesn't mean they're not going to cause the same damage later on if we don't resolve them. So I think it's hugely important that we maintain our consistency as believers. We've got to be WYSIWYGs. What you see is what you get. Don't change how you talk to people just because they're someone you don't know, or someone you're not fond of, or someone you're not friends with, or someone that's outside your family. How you talk to me, I would like you to talk to everyone else. And that's not just from me. God says it too. How he treats us, we are to treat others. It's that whole thing with passing on the blessings. We are blessed with God's consistency, so we must bless with consistency ourselves. That is how we witness to God. Yah truly values life. After all, he did create it. He loves and respects all life. Where death is pronounced in the Torah, that doesn't come without the weight of it having been something that is punishable by that. Now, we are fortunate that we don't live in a time that these laws carry the death penalty while we are in this physical life. But if we are guilty of any of these things going into the kingdom, we risk the second death. Even Yeshua says we can blot out the book of life. We are written in there, but we can blot ourselves out. So, when death is pronounced, it's not a light thing. It's not like, you've given them the death penalty, that's fine. It's because it's something that has really, really been an affront, an assault to Yah and what he has done for us, for this nation. It's a serious outcome. After all, God wishes everyone to be saved. Someone else actually brought this up before. Wonderful. That God wants everyone to be saved. 1 Timothy 2, 1-6. First of all, then, I urge that petitions, prayers, intercessions and thanksgivings be made for all men. Open book test. How many is all?
Everyone.
For sovereigns and all those who are in authority, in order that we lead a calm and peaceable life in all reverence and serious. For this is good and acceptable before Elohim our Saviour, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. For there is one Elohim and one mediator between Elohim and man, the man, Messiah, Yeshua, who gave himself a ransom for all to be witnessed in its own seasons. God wants everyone to be saved. Everyone. At first the Torah was for Israel and those dwelling in their borders. Yeshua brought that spirit to the whole world. Don't forget, when he scattered Israel into the nations, someone pointed out before that I think it was Tommy, he pointed out before that could also be read as sowing in the nations. If Israel hadn't been scattered to the four corners of the earth, the time that we're all being called back out now, we are then the lighthouses. He was building the lighthouses in the nations. He wants everyone to be saved. Not everyone. I can't say that everyone will be. It doesn't say that in scriptures. People will still perish for their willful sin, for their deliberate defiance of God, for their satanic practices, for their witchcraft, their unrepentance. But he wants all to be saved. He doesn't give him any joy to send someone to the second death. All. And because of that, we must also value the sanctity of life. We've got to respect dignity. We've got to support and not undermine people's self-worth. That's how we help people. That's why when we support someone, when we bless someone, it's not just about giving them the bog standard whatever blessing. We've got to really truly support them, because it's about respecting their dignity. If they have a lessened dignity, helping them build it back up. I remember God pulled me out of a pit of despair.
Yeah.
I was suffering with depression, and God pulled me out of it. God pulled me out of that.
Amen.
And if I can help do the same for other people, then what a blessing I can bring to others. But that's not just simply going up to saying to someone, cheer up. You know what I mean? That doesn't work for everyone. I've got to know. I've got to pray. I've got to understand. I've got to have wisdom to know what blessing to bring to someone. Because it's all about respecting that individual self-worth. And this parsha proves to me categorically that that's God's heart as well.
Yeah.
That's the heart of the Torah. Love. And you know what? All of this, our own experiences are proof of this. How many people in this room can say that when the people in their lives failed, God wasn't there? I don't think anyone in this room can say that. Even if all the people in our lives have let us down or can't support us, God's always been there. God has always brought us up, brought us out. He's always respected our dignity. If ever we feel low because of a trial that God has given us, we come out of it having learnt how to be better. God preserves our dignity, and we should do the same for our brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Amen.
And in the world.
Amen.
So, thank God that He has encouraged us to have that attitude to people.
Amen.
Love.
Praise God.
His love that we can then pass on. So, with that, we will wrap it up. Amen. Amen.